Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Today, we're joined by Justine Wares, who is a product marketing manager at UserGems. How are you, Justine?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's great having you on the show. I know you've got quite a great interesting background as well, moving from sales to customer service through to product manager as well. So paint a little bit of color for our listeners. It's always good to understand who you are and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah. I had a little bit of an interesting journey in bouncing around from a lot of revenue teams in my career. So I started out in sales, actually, and I am hesitant to call it an SDR role, but I think that's potentially what the closest comparison in today's world would be. But today you think of SDR and BDR worlds as being really strategic. When I was an SDR 10 years ago, it was more like call 250 people and spray and pray your life away. Um, so that's where I started my career. Then transferring into customer success, where I spent a really bulk of my career actually in big tech, and then transitioned as the 10th employee of UserGems, where I am currently, starting in customer success, and now I am our sole product marketing manager, where I really draw the line between our product teams, our revenue teams, and our marketing teams, in terms of like where is our product roadmap going, what is our strategy, and how do we sell these new products and our existing products to our prospects and changing with the market as we go along.
That's amazing. And a question I'm always interested in from, because you were obviously an SDR over a decade ago. At that point, when you started on the role of SDR, a lot of people are adamant they're going to move into like an AE role or a sales manager role. Was that always your plan? And instead you had a diversion, or were you always a little bit open with what you wanted to do?
It's really interesting. So I went to school for sport marketing. So I actually didn't even think I would go into sales in the first place, which I think a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
go through their education and say, I'm going to work in sales. But that's how my career started. And I was really good at booking meetings. And then eventually I did move into an AE role. And I was hitting quota, but I wasn't like exceeding any types of limits. And what I really enjoyed most about those types of roles was the relationships that I was building with prospects. And the way that I sold was always relationship based, which is maybe why I was hitting my quota, but I wasn't really exceeding into these like crazy, deals, was because I wasn't very strategic and people bought from me because I was like likable and trustworthy, which drove me into customer success. So that was kind of how I transitioned from like a SDR and an AE role into customer success, is really finding something about that role that you love and then figuring out
Yeah.
what role can you do more of that in.
Yeah. And then obviously you made the transition after a successful period in customer success into product manager as well. What drove that change?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same. So when I had transitioned from sales to customer success, it was because I really loved relationship building and I wanted to do more of it. Then as I worked in customer success, I really loved working with our product teams in terms of like building new UIs, beta testing new products, rolling out these new products to like the wider org as a product expert in customer success. And I wanted to do more of that. So I had ended up finding the role of product marketing manager, which really toes the line between our engineering and product management teams and our go-to-market teams, and making sure that we're testing the products first with a beta group, and then also making sure that our new prospects or our existing customers are adopting these new products and features.
It's the glue between the two parts of the business.
Exactly.
Uh, Hi, Justin. Thanks for being here. So, like, obviously, you're here with two co-founders of a tech company, and we are very involved on the product side, and we also have very limited knowledge on anything to do with marketing. So, where do you see what's the split between, in your role, between a deep understanding of what the product does and then driving new features, driving ideas, versus how you market that through the salespeople or on the website?
Yeah. So my role is really interesting when it has to do with new product. So I'm not only the voice of the market to our engineering team. So by voice of market, I mean speaking to our existing customers, speaking to our sales team, figuring out what prospects are asking for and what they want. but I'm also the voice of product to our market. And it's a really interesting line to go between. And so the way that I bring products to market has to be getting full buy-in from our sales and customer success teams to make sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone knows how to position these new features and products, and understanding why someone might want this and what problems this is actually solving for our key buyers, but also making it a feedback loop. So I'm not just launching new products and features because we think that this is what the market wants. Like, we need to make sure that our sales team is fully confident, like this is what the market needs, and I'm confident in selling this. So it's really important to have this like feedback loop with your sales and customer success teams. And it's really important for sales specifically to not feel like they don't get to have a voice in the product development and what's being brought to market.
Yeah. And our audience is made of, we've got a lot of salespeople, individual contributors, and senior leadership on the new logo side specifically. And there's always a debate, at least from my experience, about how much should you involve product marketing, and is it more reactive or more proactive? So do you involve product marketing when you've got a gap about a set of functionalities you can't really explain well enough so that it sticks? Or do you involve product marketing in terms of kind of feature, looking into, okay, well, this is really where the product is taking us, and we've got a big problem here because we don't cover that specific use case?
Yeah, I think you should always involve product marketing really early. And something that I work on often is interviewing. So basically what we'll do is we'll come up with a hypothesis like that. Like, is it, so right now specifically at UserGems, we are riding the AI wave, and we're trying to figure out like what types of AI or like machine learning can our product start to develop to fill different gaps in our ideal buyers' workflows. So our ideal buyers at UserGems is sales leaders, marketing leaders, and revenue operations leaders. So I speak to our existing customers and our prospects about like, what gaps right now are there in your workflows, or like, what does our product not do that you wish that it did? Compiling all of this information and bringing it back to our leadership team of being like, these are all of the things that we're seeing over and over and over again. But I'll also test some of these ideas of like, I want to build this new feature. And I'll have conversations about it, and I'll say like, hey, we're thinking about building this, or like, here's our first draft of this product. And someone might say like, oh, I have this product and it like does just the same thing, or like, I wouldn't pay for that, but it's cool. So like, knowing that before you get really deep in development is super important, because I think a lot of the times what happens is you start having like leadership teams or engineering teams building and building and building, but no one's actually asking for these things to get built. So then you end up with all of this surplus of like new features and new product, but you don't actually have any revenue to back it up because no one had asked if anyone actually even wants this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make an interesting point there, and a good one as well is going to the horse's mouth, as it were, going to those customers first. I've been in instances, or I've seen instances where salespeople also want their opinions heard as well. They're the ones in the trenches, they're speaking to prospects. And they may have lost the deal. Oh, we would have won that deal if we had feature X or feature Y. Why can't we get feature X, feature Y? How much weight as part of that decision-making process do you put behind what the sales rep or the AEs are saying? And how do you manage that relationship and expectation as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a reason why I started a program at UserGems called Voice of Customer, which is now more like Voice of Market and Customer, as we're kind of growing. And it's a place for our customers and our sales teams to be able to contribute like these exact things. Like, hey, I was talking to a prospect. It was worth X amount of dollars and they wanted this feature and we didn't win it. So the way that I always quantify like these types of asks is how much money did we either like lose out on or like churn if it was a customer, or how many times has this got brought up, and like what is the revenue impact of this, of not having this. So it really needs to tie back to some type of revenue goal or like time saved goal, which is ultimately money wasted on like, is this saving time? So those are the two ways that I measure this, like how much time is it saving or how much revenue are we losing from this? And then that's kind of how we prioritize what gets brought to our product management team. And then they will figure out like in terms of like where on the roadmap could this fit in, along with my input as well from the market of like, if I see this on the roadmap and I'm like continuously hearing this in the market, this is like an opportunity for us to then advocate for the sales team, but also advocate for our prospects to get this higher up on a priority list on our roadmap.
That's awesome. And is there a specific framework or a threshold that you work towards when you're getting this feedback to say, okay, this feature request has contributed to us losing X amount of business, or from a time aspect could have saved this much time? Is there a threshold that you have or a strict criteria which you follow to say, okay, now we can start talking about if that goes into the roadmap or not?
Yeah, it's really difficult for the stage that we're at currently. So UserGems is a startup, and we're really open to trying new like customers out. Like in terms of like if someone wants to work with us, like we're more than happy to like try it out and see like what we can do to make them successful with our product. Whereas when I had this type of role on a customer success team in big tech, it was like you needed to have like this amount of money lost or like this amount of time saved, and you needed to then like prove it out. So I think we have a lot of flexibility depending on what your company's stage and size is to be a little bit more subjective. I think my framework for it specifically is more like if this was asked for once, we're probably not going to consider it. If it's asked for at least 2 or 3 times, like let's look into it. If it's saving us, a couple $100, like let's not bother. But if it's saving us a couple $100,000, then like that's maybe a little bit more important.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the things that we have lots of debates about is where to focus our development resource, because we, much like yourself, speak to a lot of prospects and a lot of customers as well, and we're flooded with ideas. We're very open as well. Hey, tell us, what is similar to yourself, what's missing, what would you like to see, yada, yada, yada. And I get trigger happy. So I'm always taking it back, saying, hey, we should do this now. And Mick's always trying to calm me down. So
yeah. And you need that balance. So like, I think I have that same balance with our product manager. So we work really closely together, and he's wants to take on everything. Like he wants to change the world with all of these requests. And I'm kind of like the Debbie Downer in the Slack chat, like, let's take this back and look at the roadmap and see how much development time this would actually take. So it's so important though, to not have like 2 of me or 2 of him, because you can get on like this either like stagnant, like if you're not pushing yourself, but also you can get like so crazy that you're developing all of these things at once and then like nothing's finishing because your team is just like so strung out across too many different priorities. So it's good that you have this like balance.
Yeah, our CTO often says, "Oh, what have you put on the Christmas list today?" Like it's literally on a daily basis. Oh, is this what we're focusing on today? Yeah. What about tomorrow? And Justine, what's the I'm passionate about these things: product, how you market it, how you find the idea, how you develop it. What's the how does the I guess the idea travels internally from product marketing to product management to engineering, back to product marketing, I guess, to then sales enablement, sales, to then the clients. Like it seems like a very complicated multi-touch, like flywheel in a way.
Yeah, it is. And product marketing is really in the middle of it. So it kind of comes 2 ways. So it could come from like the market is saying this, and then this goes to product management, who then like prioritizes on the roadmap, to engineering, development, and then back through the PM to the product marketer, and then working really closely with our enablement teams and sales to make sure like not only do they know what this is, but they know how to position it or how to talk about this during sales calls. But then also it comes the other way too. So like with these programs, like the voice of customer program or meeting with sales teams, or even like product request or like feature requests, then it goes backwards. It kind of goes through, again, me validating that this is something that people actually would pay for, or would it make them renew with us because we have this feature and someone else doesn't. And then that would, again, go through the product manager, engineering, and then back around again. So it's kind of like a crazy 8, or like a trying to think of what that's actually called, like the infinity symbol. Which I'm sure it has a name. But yeah, you're making the the fingers symbol with it, but I don't actually know what it's called.
I don't know either, but I see what you mean. It's like an 8, but on the side.
Yes.
And so sorry, how much of this is going to create your own differentiators versus, because I've got a lot of questions around prioritization. You've got a broader roadmap, you've got things that are tactical where you can differentiate, and then you've got things where you kind of have to catch up on with regards to the competition. So how do you balance that internally, and how do you get to priority higher than another?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So a lot of my job, like I had mentioned, was interviewing, but also research. So I am always looking at like some, not even just competitors, but just other similar companies in the market of just like, what are they developing and like, where are the overlaps and what should we actually consider bringing into our product? But it really has to do with, are we going to, because you don't end up wanting to just like compete directly with someone and just build it because you think maybe you could build it better. It needs to make sense with your story of your product. So a lot of what I do is like, yes, research and make sure that we are able to compete. But we also need to make sense, make sure that we can market this. Like, it's great that we can build this, but how does this fit into our story? Like, how do we then like communicate this out in like marketing materials or on our sales discovery calls or in our SDR outreach? So it's a lot of thinking about, are we going to miss out on revenue? Can we get more shares of the market? But also, does this make sense for our like product story or our company story afterwards? So it's really those three main things.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you guys are quite agile from a development perspective because of where you are in a stage as a company. And one of the things that I always think about is if you were to receive a one-off request from a prospect that was for a sizable amount of revenue, would you build this not necessarily knowing that it's going to cater for the mass of your ICP or your TAM? Or is it something that you would just dismiss entirely because, you know, it doesn't fit into your story? It's not really your ICP, but, you know, with a little bit of tweak, maybe your product could tick that box.
I think 2 years ago when I had started, or 2.5, I guess now, my answer would be very different. I think while you're like really trying to like make a name for yourself and get more shares of the market, you're potentially able to take on product or projects like that. But I think now, as you know, we are now a little bit more well known and have this product direction that we want to go in, I think it's a lot less likely. However, I could see maybe if it's really interesting, considering it. But I would say we would definitely need to think about it more now than we did a couple of years back.
Depends on how many zeros are on the ACV.
Would you say that most product marketing teams are revenue driven in terms of like, to your point, you know, we're creating a feature so that we can unlock X amount of revenue, or this feature is less important because we've got our revenue footprint is lower? Is this typically how product marketing teams work?
That's a great question. And the answer is it's so different everywhere. Like all of the PMM communities that I'm in, like some are tied to like revenue and some are tied to just like adoption metrics. And I think you're going to kind of try to find a metric that works for you depending on like what your company is doing and where product marketing sits in your company. So sometimes it rolls up completely under product. Which is probably you're going to be measured more on like adoption and people buying the product rather than like the revenue associated with it. Whereas if you tie up under marketing, it might be more like pipeline generated based on like the awareness that you're driving to this product. So the way that I am measured is kind of both. And I know that's a terrible like way to say it. But as we launch new features, I am then measured on like who came in to request a demo because they saw this like new product, new feature, like this ad, this LinkedIn campaign, or these videos. And how do you measure that? So difficult. You have to like hope and pray that someone writes that they saw this ad on their demo request form, or I have ticks set up in Laudable and in Gong that says like, if someone talks about this, like, please alert me so I can maybe keep track of this. But it's so hard to measure those types of things in a role like this, whereas like sales is a little bit more black and white. It's like, did you close a deal today? Whereas I'm like fighting for my life in like Gong transcripts to try to find someone who cared enough about this new feature to talk to us. So it's fun.
But that's a big topic as well, because you're overlapping with so many, well, not overlapping, but you're feeding so many departments, from engineering to sales, enablement, but you're also feeding your own marketing team. So like, how do you make it to the website? So this is the new product, this is what we're going to speak about. How does that then take priority over, the rest of the marketing activities that are being looked after as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And my role now, like I've now been in product marketing for about a year, and I've never worked on a marketing team before, but I do know a lot about product. So the way that I had made product marketing like a function within UserGems is being so knowledgeable about our product and why people want to buy it, that other marketing teams want to use that in some form of content. And I think that's really important for someone to get buy-in on like, oh, this is a whole new marketing channel for me. Like now I can build ads based on like new features or like these interviews that Justine is doing and like getting all of this feedback from our customer base. Like this is something I didn't have before, and I've now unlocked a new channel. So first, getting like that type of buy-in from your team is really important. And the way I work with our other marketing teams, like people who build content and our demand gen teams, I have a slot for like product related posts. So like I'm also helping you out because I'm also kind of writing some content for you at the same time, and maybe taking like a day off of your plate on LinkedIn because I'm launching a new feature. So I've created these posts for it. But it really needs to flow into their overall content and demand gen strategy. So having really good foundational relationships with them first as you're building out this product marketing function and giving them a what is in this for me, then you can start kind of having these takeovers of parts of their content that is strictly product marketing driven.
Yeah. And product marketing seems like a nightmare from like an attribution perspective. Like, because you do so much for so many people and you're involved in so many different facets of the business. Like you were saying with sales, it's really easy if you wanted to drill down to see your ROI on the individual. You could do that quite straightforward. You know what to get paid, you know how much business they've closed, you understand your margins, yada, yada, yada. How do you measure the success of a product marketing department?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, has there been an uptick in adoption? So like if we have launched a subject, like a feature that is kind of more of like a sub feature, like how many people are adopting this, and then how many people are staying with us and renewing, like did that increase? Like was launching these new features also driving our retention rates, because now we have these new better features for our customers to use. So that's one way. I think another way is the pipeline generated off of these different campaigns of launches, so product launches. But I think the main way, and kind of what I lean a lot on, is how valuable are you to your leadership team? So something with product marketing, it has to do a lot with research and a lot of interviewing, but making sure that this is taken seriously by your leadership team is super important. So I'm really lucky where our leadership team loves win-loss interviews. So I do a win-loss, like extensive interview and presentation to our leadership team every quarter. And if someone on one of our listeners doesn't know what win-loss is, I basically interview a bunch of people who went through our sales process, whether they bought us or didn't. And I have a theme, like, is it something about our product? Is it something about our sales discovery? Is it something about our pricing and packaging? And I dig in on this and then I present it to our team, which then ends up being one of the OKRs for like a lot of these departments in the next quarter or the quarter after. So something that we had uncovered earlier this year is that our pricing and packaging was a little bit confusing. So we've just launched this new pricing and packaging, but that took 3 quarters of our like leadership time and our sales team betaing it. And it's really impactful. And that's something that was drawn from one of my projects. So having these like big overarching projects that tie into your leadership's goals, making sure that you're able to like point this back to a project that you're working on and being impactful for your company overall, and not just for marketing or not just for sales or not just for engineering. Like making sure you're having a big impact is super important on like proving how valuable product marketing is to your org.
Awesome. And I love the concept of a win-loss review, especially speaking to people who've gone through the process and have not signed with your company. I think is so important, but it's often a difficult thing to approach. So what's the approach you take? Like just taking it down to a really basic level. Is it you pick up the phone? Is it the AU who connects you? Or how do you actually get that into motion?
Yeah, I love win-loss. And if your company's not doing this, definitely start it, or reach out to me if anyone ever wants to talk about win-loss. But I actually do it all internally and I do it all myself. So I have Salesforce reports that I pull and I interview people who have obviously bought our product, so that's a little bit easier. But then I interview anyone who made it like stage 3 or farther in our sales process and didn't end up buying. So the reason I do that is because sometimes if you end up on someone in an earlier stage, they're kind of more in like the educational phase and there's not necessarily like this robust knowledge and they don't really have enough feedback. So you want to pick like whatever your maybe mid stage would be. And then we use Outreach, and I sync them up into Outreach and I offer a gift card. We do $75, which as a fun fact performs better than 100.
Nice.
So it's better than 50, better than 100. 75 is where you want to go with an incentive if you're able.
There you go.
And yeah, you always pick a theme. So something that I have been doing is not just kind of being like, why'd you buy? What problems do you have? Like, what did you do instead? Like, figure out what the actual business problem is that quarter, and then shape all of your questions around that. And then use AI to help you divulge the data afterwards. But yeah, making sure that you have like all of this in a bite-sized piece for your leadership team, but also have clear action items at the end of it. So say like, with talking to all of these people, like I am now an expert on this problem, and here are my recommendations for you to consider on what should be important next quarter. Let's talk about it. And kind of having those like actionable recommendations rather than just like, here's a bunch of data, that's not going to be impactful for your leadership team. So making sure that you are now an expert on this and then having a recommendation is really important to making win-loss not like a swept under the rug thing that no one wants to listen to.
And you're doing this consistently, like throughout the year?
We do this now every quarter since I started as a full-time product marketer here, this is now about a year in. It's been really great.
Consistency pays off, whatever you do.
That's true.
I've got a few questions around data, because so the first question is, how much data is just anecdotal versus you start getting a trend and a pattern that you can then exploit? And the second question is, for the companies who can't capture enough data to start with, what's the best way to get started on creating a framework that both capture the data, but also good data that you can then use?
Yeah, I think so. The first question is, how much data do you have that's just like anecdotal data versus like
so
statistical data?
You spoke about doing win-loss interviews, and you may come across maybe 2 or 3 accounts that are sharing the same reason why they've lost, and maybe that's too little to make a judgment. But then you might be missing out on a sub reason, which is across the board, but you don't ask, like what I mean by just where do you draw the line between, okay, that's a good insight versus we need more of this?
Yeah, it's really difficult to do because a lot of the times when you're hearing the same thing like that, that's not the real reason. So something that I have started to do when doing these types of interviewing is get really uncomfortable and but why does that matter? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the business? Can you explain it to me one more time? Like, why does this actually matter to you? And then as you kind of start getting into the why, it starts becoming this different problem. So at one point, it's something like in UserGems case, like I wanted to track my buyers for job changes. But then after asking why that is important multiple times, it ends up being like we aren't hitting our pipeline numbers because we don't have enough warm leads for our SDRs. And that is a problem. Like that there is the problem that we can solve. The problem that we solve for you isn't that we track your buyers for job changes. So getting really uncomfortable with these is really important. And then hopefully you won't have these like, oh, like one or two people said this, but then like other people said this, like keep digging in on why. And then you'll start to get these more common answers and like have more of them to go off of.
Who taught you, sorry, and then we can go to the question about how do you set up the framework to capture the data to start with, but you obviously have a very particular background where you've been exposed to clients, you've been in a new logo role, like doing the awkward calls and getting people from completely cold on the pipeline. So I would assume you've got a certain comfort in speaking with strangers and getting, to these conversations really quickly. But who taught you that? I mean, how do you learn these things if you're perhaps coming from the product side where you're less exposed to external stakeholders, or from the digital marketing side where you look at spreadsheets and data more than you actually speak to the end users?
Yeah. And it's really hard because I think that the way that I speak to everyone in my professional life is the same way that I speak to everyone in my personal life. Like it's not kind of like this act that I put on that I think a lot of people struggle with. So learning it is really difficult if you're not in one of these like sales or like customer facing roles in the first place, because a lot of the times what happens is someone with this personality gravitates towards that role and then they're like very good at speaking to people externally. If you're coming from one of these sides that are more like product or analytical or marketing, something that I've done in the past is have like a mentorship community, or even get a mentor in the space that you want to be in, or even partner with your sales team a little bit. So we used to do this like shadowing, but where sales and CS would kind of watch each other do their jobs and get more comfortable being uncomfortable, which is a very common sales tactic. Whereas someone who comes on from more of like a non-prospect or customer facing role might not be exposed to that type of energy. So it might be very jarring when you're tasked with one of these, like you're doing 40 interviews now, like have at it. And like, where do you start? Getting into a community specifically around like whatever function or role that you're in is super important.
Yeah, it's really good advice. And sorry, I'm taking all the questions here, but about creating that framework that captures the data. So we spoke about usage data, we spoke about conversational intelligence, we spoke about outreach engagement data. If you start from scratch, like in our case, what do you activate to start capturing those data points?
Yeah, it is not fancy the way that I do this. So I will warn you now. Like I said, I pull reports in Salesforce. I then upload this into Outreach. Any sales engagement tool works. Even if you want to just shoot them off manually is fine. What I do then is I record everything in a Google form. So I have all of the questions in a Google form, and then you're able to analyze all of the answers for each call in a Google Excel spreadsheet. So it'll link to a sheet, and then you can use that and also the call transcripts from maybe something like Gong, or even if you just like recorded it on Zoom or whatever recorder you have, you can upload the transcripts too into like a ChatGPT or like a Laudable, and you can pull different and you can start finding like similar stories or like similar ports and then quantify it that way. So it is a little bit manual, but truthfully it works just fine. Especially if you have like really clear idea of what you want to get out of this, and you have a really clear set of questions that you're asking consistently throughout all of the interviews. So something else that I would recommend is like, make sure you're using the same questions across all of these interviews, or you're never going to see any types of like parallels. Even if the interviewee is kind of like going off into this direction that like does not help you at all, reel it back and like, don't feel bad about it. Like this is for you, and they're helping you too. So they're totally okay with going back on track.
Yeah, awesome. And we probably have some listeners who might potentially want to move into product marketing as well. It's such an important role, especially now. What would you say was the biggest surprise for you, or maybe the biggest learning curve that you experienced when you move into the role? Something you didn't think would happen that did?
Yeah. Something that I have never really done before is create marketing content in a way that like LinkedIn posts or like one pagers or newsletters. And it sounds so easy. You're like, oh, I'll slap together a newsletter. And then like one person reads it and they're like, this is so jargony and means nothing to anyone that will ever read this. So I think like something that I've always been really good at is understanding products and how they work and explaining them face to face to somebody or showing them how they work. But if you try to get me to explain it in like a LinkedIn post, I'm like explaining machine learning to someone who's in first grade. And it's really difficult, I think, to understand how to take all of this like expertise that you have and write compelling content with it. So any type of practice that you can get with that, whether it's like writing on your own LinkedIn and starting to tell stories that are engaging, or like having a like even small newsletter if you're like in a sales org, like talk about something that you did that week that was really helpful and break it down really simply for your team to follow. And those types of like exercises will then make it a lot easier when you're having to communicate these types of things to a broader audience.
Yeah. And I know, you know, at the moment, everybody's trying to build their own personal brand as well, especially on LinkedIn. So you're probably seeing people post daily at the moment. What would you say is like a recommended framework for these posts? Because I try to post a lot on LinkedIn, but to be honest with you, sometimes I'm like, don't really know what to post about today. And so, you know, it's a lot more harder than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because what the LinkedIn gurus tell you to do is post like once or twice a day. But then you end up with this content that like no one cares about if you're like really trying to post. So something that I've been told in the past is post when you feel like you have something valuable to tell the world. Otherwise, don't. Which I know is kind of hard when you're trying to build a LinkedIn presence. So I think like once or twice a week is also fine. The way that we do just like, if that's your personal brand, the way we do our product posts is normally once a week. So if you're looking for any guidance on that, having like one day a week that's dedicated to product, we do it once a week.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about out of time, but it's been great having you on. Very, very valuable content for our listeners. I really appreciate you making the time. We do have a wrap-up question, which we ask all of our guests, which is throughout your whole career to date, what is your best memory and why?
Yeah. That's a really great question, specifically because I have loved working in big tech. And I always think that like all of my most cherished memories are there. But I think my mindset's changing a little bit. And I think it was meeting the UserGems team of what it was for the first time in Mexico in March of 2022. I was, again, the 10th employee. At this point, I think we were maybe 20 people when we all went to Mexico. And it was just so fun to get completely out of your comfort zone, but meet these people who are in this startup with you, really passionate about what you're building together, and then having a really clear mindset together on what you want the startup to be. I think that was probably my favorite memory.
Awesome. Great memory. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us once again. It's been very, very valuable content. So really appreciate you making the time. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast sponsored by Joint Flows. Until next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.